Good morning, I'm Rajiv from Fixo. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're just going to wait a couple of moments as the room starts to fill up. We've had knocking on for 100 people who are really keen to hear about deconstructing their business and understanding how best to drive performance. So we're just going to wait for the room to fill up, but thank you very much for joining us today. For those of you who haven't previously been on one of our webinars, you will be in mute mode by default, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. That's to help other audience members hear more clearly. So if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, insights, please do share them with us. On the right hand side of your screen, you will have a GoToWebinar control panel, which looks a little like that on the screen. And we'd love to hear you. And we have time dedicated at the end of the webinar to address any of the questions you have, including anything about implementing what you hear today in your business. Today, we're looking at deconstructing and uncovering the true value of your business. It's around process engineering, understanding your processes, and really driving optimal performance and achieving the true potential of your agency. Not that I think it's particularly relevant for what we're going to cover today, unlike some of the other more legally focused topics, but today is for general information purpose only. It shouldn't be considered as legal advice or official guidance, and you'll get Nathan's contact details at the end of today's webinar so that you may want to follow up with him to understand anything in any more detail. We've got a lot to cover off, so with that, I'd love to introduce our guest. I'm very grateful for him joining us today, Mr. Nathan Emerson, a Property Mark board member on the board of Agents Giving, but would you like to give the audience a brief introduction to who you are, your background, and what you do?
Absolutely, Raj. Thanks. So my primary role is as a property industry consultant, and I've primarily worked with business owners in a number of different formats. So that will be through mentoring groups, which I run through Property Mark, but also with individual business owners and individual organisations which are looking to take things on to the next level. So I do work on a very personal basis with people, and it is I'm not afraid to challenge, let's put it that way, really. So I'm trying to actually take people on to the next level and let them take themselves to the next level is probably where we are. And my background basically is pretty much on a full multi-agency background. So again, the ability to pull in from different sectors of the industry often offers a very different insight than just sector specific. And again, having been a business owner, going from a small company with others up to growing quite a large company, I've been through the pains of that, from very little staff all the way up to 150. So I understand that side of things, and that's quite an interesting challenge for a lot of companies. They are wanting to expand, but there are various points along the journey where expansion can be quite painful, and it's actually understanding those and mitigating those before you get there, which can save a lot of time, effort, and money, really. So my main strength probably is a mind for system implementation, really, but equally driving that through and ensuring that there is a delivery at the end, which is sometimes the more difficult challenge for many people when they're busy. Simple as that. It's a great market, it's a great opportunity, and my job is to help people just take that next step if that's what they want to do, really.
That's actually brilliant. And I know some of the companies you work with, and one of the key differentiators that come through is that you've walked the walk. So it's not that you have successfully scaled a business, but you've successfully scaled a business or been part of the team that's scaled an agency business, a full service agency business in the UK that won loads of awards, many from customers, many from across the sector itself. And that you implemented what we're going to be talking about today to great effect. So we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Today's topics are listed on the screen, so hopefully you can see all of those. I'm going to start with process mapping. So how do you start the process of deconstructing and understanding your business, and why would you do this?
Okay, good question. So let me start of saying that when you look at most businesses, as they evolve and they grow, they do change, and very much our viewpoint of what we see is sometimes through a little bit of rose-tinted glasses. So if I was to say, how do you start it? The easiest thing I always recommend is remember the green cross code man. You know, stop, look, and listen. A little kid runs across the road, gets squashed. We're not trying for that to happen. What we're trying to do is get people to stop, spend some time just looking and listening at their own businesses, really, and just that very first step actually starts a journey which, when it's done properly, starts to reveal a lot of positive and sometimes negative things. And why would you want to do it is probably the next question, really, in that. As you start that process that we mentioned about building, a lot of the building with systems and structures, it's almost like a sandwich. You start off with, I don't know, with a bacon sandwich or a ham sandwich, then you add another layer, and all of a sudden it becomes a club sandwich, and then all of a sudden it becomes a stacker. And then, but what actually happens when you're doing that is one level might have bacon in it, but all of a sudden then you don't realise you put another layer in with some more bacon, and actually all of a sudden you're actually reproducing the same environment again and again and again through multiple applications and multiple workflows. And so not only can you be repeating tasks or duplicating various parts of a process, very often you're not actually utilizing a lot of the structures and systems you've got in place in the first place. So it does actually become more of a convoluted exercise than people probably realize. Because they're doing it day to day, they follow a process and they follow a system, but very rarely do people actually sit and start to take things apart and ask probably the most simple question of all, which I would say is why are we doing this? Why am I not doing this another way? Why are we not? And so it's starting to introduce some very simple, very simple ideas which will start to break apart and challenge what we do, why we do them, and how we could improve them, really.
That's brilliant. And a couple of points that you made I just want to bring out, which are from a business owner's perspective, particularly as a business scales, it can be hard to take yourself from working in the business to on the business. So what you've suggested there is the business owner should take themselves out of the day-to-day. And the second thing you've highlighted, I think, is that as a business grows, there can be a divergence between what the sort of frontline team members are doing and their understanding and what the agency owner or director thinks is happening. So could you give us any examples of, on a no-names basis, of what you've seen out there and what people can do to mitigate that?
I can, and I'll go through some ideas, and I'll also expand on that. So one of the first things I'll often ask people, if I ask a staff member to do a workflow and a diagram and a plan through how they think a process works, and I ask a business owner their viewpoint on things, I very rarely get those in tandem, and it's probably one of the best exercises ever that highlights that you've got the same company with two different understandings of where things are. And it's almost like Romans build a straight line to get from A to B, and as you build and merge a business, you can end up with a case of snakes and ladders going on, and very often end up in a tub of spaghetti. And so the processes that people go through are not as robust as they should be. And equally, you've got two different types of journeys. You've got a customer journey, which is all about taking somebody on and taking them almost like a ride at Alton Towers. You want them to have a certain experience which is pleasurable, enjoyable, exhilarating, and memorable, really, and the perfect environment. But to do that, you then have a separate workflow, which is the delivery, which provides the cocoon and the shell for that ride that they're going on, that gives them the experience, but actually provides the comfort and security and the ability for that to repetitiously happen without fault. And so, if I can give you some very, very basic examples of that, one company that we sat and looked at, they had just their lettings process alone to get there was 170 odd different steps. And actually, by the time we sat and broke it down and looked at duplication on the systems, and we actually pulled it down to just under 75 steps. And that might sound a lot, but for anybody doing letting, average between 1.5 and 2 hours over the case of a standard letting transaction of man hours. And when you start doing that by the volume of that particular company, that was 1.5 persons earnings and salaries. I mean, we were talking a saving of £50,000 to £60,000 just for going through a process which then also freed up a lot of time to be reinvested elsewhere. So there are a lot of benefits to doing this, but what it also does is creates the ability to go forward in another direction. It creates you capacity to redirect, shall I say, rather than anything else.
Sorry, I was muted. So that's really interesting. As a business, this is the fixed flow approach to the world, which is we start by thinking about what is the process and how can we optimize it. We then look for technology that can achieve the goal, and only after that do we look to hire. And that's the standard process as we're looking to take on new team members, which we do. But the starting process is process optimization. So is it achieving the right goal? Is it doing it in an efficient manner? The second thing is there something off the shelf that we can buy that will achieve that goal? And the third is hire, or redirect someone in. So that's how we've approached it. I'd like to move on to the second topic, if that's okay, which is, I think, actually, before we do that, as a business owner listening to this, what's the first thing I should do tomorrow if I am interested in process mapping or deconstructing my business? What should I do tomorrow?
The first thing for me, so actually, I actually like the white piece of paper approach, really, and for me, the starting point is where do I actually want it to be, not where I am at the moment. And so, I spend a lot of time with people trying to work out what it is that they actually want. Where is the end direction of where we're going? But then take that back once you've got an idea of that and say, well, what are we doing at the moment? And it's like going up steps or down steps. You can start going as granularly as you want to do. For me, it's always start with basics. The telephone rings, somebody picks up the telephone. What's the next thing that happens? What are the options that can come off that telephone call? Could it be a valuation? Could it be a complaint? Could it be an inquiry? Could it be? There are various different options that will come out of that telephone call, and where do we go from there? And an understanding really of those two journeys we talked about. What is your company delivering to the client and the customer and the consumer? What is your company delivering back to itself? And that clarity, I'm not saying it's easy work, but once you've got that clarity, it actually makes decisions very, very simple to make.
That's amazing. So I think through that you've described a three-stage process, which is you start by describing the optimum journey, both internally, so the process flow, and the customer journey. You as an owner describe what you think is happening, and then you get the team to tell you what's actually happening. And I suspect you'll end up with three very different variations of a journey.
You do. So you've found the pinnacle of the mountain you're aiming for, but which path are we going up to get to the top?
Perfect. Optimization. So we've now got all our process flows down and the business processes down and the customer journey down. What do you do next? How do you streamline that? How do you redesign it? How do you start climbing the mountain?
Okay, so let's stick with the mountain. So I would say when you are doing this, the most important thing is actually getting staff engagement. Okay, so if you look at a mountain, if I'm stood looking at a mountain, I see one viewpoint of it. If on the other side of the mountain, I'll see a very different viewpoint and maybe a different path. You can use the same analogy with a dice. If I've got a dice and I'm looking at it, I'm probably seeing the number 2. You might be the other side of the dice and you see number 6. So you should never take one viewpoint because that is very, very subjective. You have to be inclusive and you have to see all the different viewpoints to find the best path to get up the mountain, really. And equally, when you start on that path up the mountain, depending on which route you take, will have knock-on effects in different ways. So, it's a very, very inclusive journey. And if you take people along with you, the more people you've got on the trail with you, the higher up the mountain you can go because everybody supports each other. There is no point charging up a mountain on your own, standing there with a flag, because all of a sudden you've got no supplies, you've got no food, you've got no water, and there's nobody going to help you down the mountain when you're tired. So, if you want to keep a presence on the mountain, there always needs to be somebody at the top.
And you talked about, I think the die analogy is really good. So your view and the staff, the team members' views. Do you think you should get customers' views as well on that process, because they may have a different?
I do, but I think what you have to bear in mind when you do customer views, the natural defaults. If I said to you, Raj, today, let's talk to some fixed flow customers, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to your safe bets, you're going to go to your champions, you're going to go to the people that you feel would support fixed flow. But actually, if you really want to get it right, you want to be looking at the people that don't support it. And that's sometimes a big step for people to take, because it's not the people that are converts, it's the people that aren't converts is where your biggest marketplace is. And I think once you've got a structure, and I use a lot of foundations, a lot of people work with me, I talk a lot about the foundation of a building, really. Once you've got a foundation of a building, you can build a shed on it or you can build a skyscraper on it, but it's all down to the strength of that foundation in the first place. And what we're looking to do when we're looking at systems and structures is build that foundation. Now, you should never restrict people as to what's then built on the foundation. If your staff are too restricted or the client's too restricted, then actually you don't get anywhere. You know, they have to use their day-to-day skills. We're all human, but it's building that foundation. Now, when it comes to bringing in the clients, I think there definitely is a root viewpoint from that, absolutely. And I think, but what you've got to do is you've got to have that foundation first for them to start adding the bricks onto what you're building. Does that make any sense?
That makes perfect sense, and I love the property
and again,
analogy.
When you add into that, you know, you've then got the distractions of day to day. You know, dare I say, and I don't mean the wrong way, prop tech. Prop tech is a great thing that's helping a lot of people. But if I was to say to you about fixed flow, Raj, would you say to me that everybody uses all the aspects of fixed flow?
No.
Right. So you've got a system there you've built. Correct. So you've got a system there you built which may have 1,000 different permutations. You'll probably tell me more than that. And what happens is we all segregate to using certain parts of a system that we're comfortable with, and then we'll go and do something else somewhere else. And very often we don't all use the full capabilities of a system, and dare I say it, we don't understand them. And I'm probably as guilty as the next man of that. You know, you get in a routine, you find something that plugs a hole in your day-to-day business. Very often you try and make the prop tech fit around your business rather than adapting your business around a product that you bought that actually is designed specifically to help you achieve a better workflow. It's very hard for products to adapt around a business. It's easier for a business which are human and can move to adapt around a product if that product's right for their business. There's no point you building 1,000 processes if they're only going to use 10 of them.
I think that's so I think that technology for agents has changed. So historically, it was relatively slow moving and stable. And with the prop tech solutions out there now, they're updating daily, weekly, monthly, and it is hard for agents. And I'd strongly encourage everyone out there to go to your range of prop tech suppliers and say, how can we keep on top of what's going on? And I'd also encourage them to have an internal champion for each system. So you have one person internally who knows what's going on, reads the release notes, and then you have effectively someone who can train the other members of the team.
Yeah, an in-house expert, absolutely. And again, I think it's an understanding of what do people do. I mean, if you look at maps, if I've got a map of one county and I turn over in the map book and there's another county, sometimes they overlap. And that's exactly what you've got with a lot of the products that are out there. And what happens is you can actually find that some information gets entered on one, some information gets entered on another, but so overlap. One staff member will do one system and one will do another. And so it's a very common occurrence as people understand and deliver more functionality within those systems they're paying for. The problem is the clarity for a business owner and the reliability of the systems and the structures to transfer over at a later date become very clouded, and it's also very difficult to find that information when you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the core property management systems out there have responded. I'm not going to name any names, but some of them are now moving to an open API system and looking to connect things. So you've got that single source of truth. But sort of jumping back to streamlining and redesigning the processes, you work with lots of agencies, and I know that you're very, very confidential about who you work with, but without dropping any names in there, can you talk about any sort of real life examples of how they've done this and what the outcome's been?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably one I mentioned earlier on, which I've got permission to just divulge a bit about that one. You know, I mean, that was 140, 150 process, and we actually mapped that through, and that was just one work stream on tenancies, and we actually went through the entire organisation working on that model, really. And when you think about a business, and I think about it very strongly. A business is only ever three things. You've got a sourcing side of things, you've got a processing side of things, and you've got a delivery and a completion side. There's only ever three stages to any business. And very often what happens is the processing side of things, if it isn't as smooth, you can pull stuff in and you can source as much business as you want, but if you can't process it adequately, then you can't then push it out the other end. And so how you deal with that interim phase is very, very important indeed. When you get the processing right and people have got their degree of flexibility within that environment to adapt comfortably, confidently with security and support, dare I say, from a business owner, you're then in a position where the savings in efficiencies can either create additional capacity in that environment or allow you to redivert into actually pulling and sourcing more business. The reason a lot of people struggle for business in a harder market is actually they don't have enough upfront sourcing capability, because a lot of what they've done has been diverted to actually processing. But sometimes you didn't need that many people processing, because like the bowl of spaghetti I mentioned earlier on, your processes were such a mess that you needed lots of people delving in there every 5 minutes trying to find that bit of ravioli at the bottom of the spaghetti. Whereas actually, if those pieces of spaghetti were laid out in a nice uniform angle, it would be very, very straightforward, not only to find your ravioli, but also to work out how much capacity you've got in the system in the first place to allow you to source more and, more importantly, output more. So the success in building many companies is not about how much you throw into the pot, it's how much you can take through the journey to allow to escape out the other end.
Amazing, thank you. And just as a reminder, you can submit questions, comments, thoughts, feedback and insights via the comment box on the right hand side of your screen, the GoToWebinar box. And one of the questions that's already come in, I think it's more of a comment actually, is covered off I think in our next section, which is broadly, that's great, but will it work for me? I don't have time, is the sort of synopsis. So how do you take into account the regional market variations, the new ways of working, and the fact that business owners are getting battered at the moment by not just the pandemic, but new regulations, constantly changing financial situation, and the market being really volatile? So what are the sort of generalities, and how do you sort of tailor it to the specific markets people work in?
Correct. And that, do you know what? Absolutely brilliant question. And I think the view, obviously, that you mentioned from that individual's very, very pertinent, really. So, again, if you look at the regional variations in market, everybody gets, oh, well, my business is different because I'm in London. My business is different because I'm in the Northeast. My business. Listen, we're doing the same thing. We're putting properties on the market. We're letting or selling properties, and we're driving those through to completion or a tenancy move-in, whatever. And again, you've still got the same three processes in whatever marketplace you're sourcing business, you're processing business, and you're completing business. So regional variations are often things that people who work within regional markets focus on. And I did very much when I was in agency, having now taken a broader expanse, and I spent many, many years obviously operating all over the country in various guises. You actually do find that the regional variations often are actually a mental block to achieving what you need to achieve. And something which I've done quite a lot recently with some of the mentoring groups that I do through Property Mart is breaking things down into steps and a step process. And the gentleman that mentioned how busy he is absolutely correct, as is everybody else. Where is the time to do this? But actually, when you break things down into probably 4 or 5 simple steps, and I have a process that we work through with people, you end up with some headline steps, and they always will be fairly major steps. But once you start breaking the tasks involved in those steps down and breaking that down again, each step becomes its own workflow. It's like everything. You can take little steps. I can't walk to the top of a mountain in one leap. I can't do it. What I can do is I can take one step. Then I can take another step another day. You don't have to take a step every single day. Sometimes the day-to-day business needs will restrict you from taking a step for 2 or 3 days or a month. But the main thing is, if you've got a path and a journey, eventually you will reach the top of the mountain. If you don't start that journey, what actually happens is you float around the bottom of the mountain. The tidal wave comes in and you're not lying dry. You're still stuck at the bottom of the mountain. And many business owners, and I work with an awful lot of certainly business owners where they're individuals, they will often ring me for help and advice just on a daily basis. They're spinning 10 plates. All of a sudden, they've got to spin 11 plates, 12 plates. There's only so many plates you can spin before things start falling off. And very often, the man that doesn't spread himself thin and actually spins 4 or 5 plates, but keeps those plates spinning faster and faster with help from his team, will actually achieve more than the man trying to please the world and spin 15 plates. Because when one plate falls, the rest all start to fall. And you can't build a business around one individual. At some point, you have to help them take the step to actually work on their business. And that is incremental steps, small, manageable steps that are not stressful. They're not going to take the pressure on the business owner to a level where they can't cope. It's all about a very gradual process because the business still has to run at the same time.
I think you have just touched on another question that's come through, which I'm going to paraphrase, and apologies if this isn't quite right. If it's not quite right, please submit the question again, which is, to what extent can I effectively delegate this process deconstruction and change management piece to a member of my team or members of my team? So does it all have to be me?
Absolutely not. And that's one of the hardest things to do. Let me put it this way: as a business owner, sometimes you are the one person who can do everything well. You're the best person to list a house and value a house. You're the best person to deal with a complaint. You're the best person to deal with a, TPO inquiry, whatever. You're the fastest person to do it. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're being the most efficient. So I run things very often. People who work with me, I say you've got £5 and £10 an hour jobs, you've got £25 an hour jobs, and you've got £50 an hour jobs. If you're costing your company £50 an hour and you're doing the £10 an hour admin job, then there's a deficiency there. And so actually utilising those people is good. And again, having the confidence who to give what work to is actually part of the skill set of developing. You are undoubtedly the best person because you have vested interest. It's your company. You own it. It isn't their company at the end of the day, regardless how passionate about your company they are. It's not theirs. I think of it like being a spider in the web. So long as you can sit in the center of the web and you can feel the tremors, then you can ask different people to deal with different strands of that web for you that all circulates back to you. Sometimes you've got to leave the web and go and do something else. But at least you know the web is there, the web is strong, and when you come back in, you just resume what you were doing in the first place. That's part of how I teach.
I think we've got the follow-up part of that question that's just come through. I'm assuming it's from the same person, which is, that's great, but how do I stop that turning into a finger-pointing exercise at or from the person that's leading it if it's not me?
So ultimately, you will always lead. If you're an owner or CEO, you have responsibility for that project. Okay, so think of yourself as a site foreman. You are not a joiner, you are not a bricklayer, you're not a roofer, you're not an electrician, you're not a plumber. What you are is you're like a conductor at a band, and so the analogy that I always tend to use to people is your job is to conduct everybody else. That there shouldn't be a finger pointing thing, because it is all about, back to one of the very first things I said, it's about bringing people on the journey. When you make change, staff get worried. You get worried about change because you're not always sure it's the right thing to do. So the very first stages of anything, again, back to those foundations, the foundations in your business is not just you, it is also your staff and your team. And it's an understanding that we're going on this journey together, because there is no point being a business owner trying to lead and the team not following you, or very worse still, going in a different direction. Sometimes their direction is sometimes a better way to get to where you want to get to. So for me, it's teaching people to take everybody on the journey at the same time, but ultimately you are the point of control, you are the final decision maker, but it doesn't mean you can't articulate that they make the decision that you want.
Okay, we've had a couple more questions in on this topic, so I'm going to pause there on that, if that's okay, and bring them back to audience questions, because I know we've got quite a lot more to cover, but I think this is something that people are really interested in. And so on to implementation. So we've reviewed our plans, we've got a plan for optimizing, we've got the team bought in, and we've done any necessary localization for our geography or our market or the market conditions. How do you ramp up activity levels? And I guess, how do you know whether you're successful? How do you monitor the implementation of change so people just don't go back to the old way of doing things?
Okay, so I'm a great believer in continuous improvement, really, and actually taking more bite-sized chunks to actually achieve where you need to get to, because I think A, they're easy to implement, and B, people do divert. So let me give you an example. Raj, okay, you take flying lessons and you pass your flying tests, okay, and you've got a little Cessna and you're sat in your little Cessna and it's got a little rudder and it's got a couple of dials and you can fly, and you're going to say to me, Nathan, I can fly, aren't you? Fantastic.
Yeah.
So that is the day-to-day agency, okay? And now I make a load of changes and I drop in a typhoon and I sit you in the platform of the typhoon, and now you're looking at 3,000 different dials, more than one joystick, and all of a sudden, can you fly? So actually what happens is now you panic. Now the truth is the rudimentary controls actually probably are the same, but the fact is you panic, you divert, I put you back in the Cessna, you're very comfortable, you can fly around, you can loop the loop, because that's where you're known. So when people do a lot of changes and they implement a whole brand new, new system, new CRM, what they often do is they switch one off, whack the other one on, and all of a sudden you're sat there looking at a typhoon that you've got no way of understanding how to fly, and you've only had a quick lesson on it. So actually, to break these things down, what you have to do is people have natural default actions. So the minute they're under pressure, the minute things go wrong, they default back to what they do. In some cases, that's I go back to an Excel spreadsheet when I can't work it out on the CRM. For some people, I've still got my written book. You know, when I've been writing on OneNote, I now go back to my written book because I can't get into my computer properly. Everybody has defaults that they go back to, and that's what actually undoes most changes, because people rush it in, they make a big change, the staff then under different working environments default back to what they did before, and you actually end up in a bigger mess than you were in the first place. So back to those steps I said, the more you break it down and get the first step embedded properly, get that so it becomes second nature. Then the next step becomes second nature. There's more to be achieved by granular increases than there is ever to actually make a wholesale change. If I ask you to be left-handed today, you can't do it. It won't take you long to go back to using your right hand. But actually, if every day I make you write with your left hand for 2 minutes a day, 2 minutes becomes 3 minutes, becomes 4 minutes, becomes 5 minutes. If I increase it a minute a day, eventually we'll get to stage you use your left hand more than your right hand. Does that make sense? Your natural default is to go back to right hand under pressure.
And so you're talking about creating habits or breaking old habits. How, as a manager, do you track that that's happening? So beyond saying, please do X, or our way of doing this is X, how do you track whether that people are actually doing it rather than saying they're doing it?
So the first thing is I assume they don't do it. So the mother of all assumptions is to assume people are doing. You know, the first rule in anything like this is assume that they won't do it. So you're not looking to see that they've done it. You're looking for the telltale signs to show that they've not done it. And that's always the easiest place to go to, because when you go to that place and it's empty, you know they're in the right zone. When you go to that place and find that it's full, then you know that exactly what's going on. So don't chase the journey. Go to the destination that they're aiming to get to, and you'll find the answer there.
I'm going to use I'm going to butcher an analogy here, so apologies, but it's the sort of green M&Ms one, which is when roadies were setting up shows for, I'm going to call them a heavy metal band. I can't remember who it was. That's embarrassing. One of their requests was not blah 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 blah, and we want a bowl of M&Ms with no green ones in there. And they used that as the sort of sanity check to see if they'd done that thing in that entire list. They were pretty confident they'd done everything else. So that's sort of what I took from you in terms of looking for things that haven't happened.
Correct. And look, places you expect they would go to if they hadn't done it correctly.
And then, so to me, this is a sort of journey that I suspect you take your clients through. So they've now implemented the change and it's in there. How do you then drive the continuous improvement that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, so again, incremental increases and incremental changes. So the continuous improvement, again, when you teach people to run, if you go to a high performance athlete, they've gone through a journey, they're still running the same run every single day, but every day they get slightly better and they're trying things slightly differently. It's all about continuous improvement. We're talking about incremental improvement. We're talking about shaving off every day, quarter of a second, another quarter of a second, another quarter of a second. And actually, that's the way that not only do you get the result, but you get consistency on a longer period of time. Anybody can go out and run flat out today, and you'll absolutely nail it. Your first run, when you start running again, you'll do a brilliant job, but then you'll be laid up for 3 days afterwards. So actually, your performance over a 4-day period is very, very poor, and it's a peak. So what you actually need is continuity over a 4-day period, which will actually bring you better results than a one-off burn. And so actually what we're looking at is incremental improvements over a sustainable period of time, which reduces the stress, is easier to monitor, and ironically, when people go off curve, it's easier to bring them back in line. It's like a tanker. If you've got a tanker and it's 2 degrees off, it doesn't make a difference today, but in a year's time, it will be the other side of the globe. So what we're looking at is just little incremental changes. I can't turn a tanker tomorrow. I can't turn it around today, but I can change its course over several months. And most of us are in this journey for a 5, 10, 15-year period.
I'm going with, you have used the most and most interesting analogies of anyone we've had on our webinar series so far, so thank you. And I'd just like to bring it back before we come to the audience questions which are coming through, and we've got about 10 minutes left at the end, so if you've got any, please do put them in. We've talked through a process right from the start of process mapping, optimization, getting the team on board, implementing, and through to continuous improvement. But I'd like to bring it back to what we started with, which is, what are the benefits? So why would someone who's listening to this this webinar today, why would they start this, and what can they expect to happen through this deconstruction and re-engineering process?
Okay, so let's put it this way. Every ship has a port. Okay, I'll finish off an analogy. So we've got our ship, we've got our tanker, he's going to a port, okay? And the first thing is guiding it into port. And the ultimate port for most business owners at some point will be an exit. So let's start with that one, really. The journey to an exit is sometimes a short journey, but sometimes it's a long journey. And sometimes the people that get the better results are the people that are on the long journey. Over time, the oil price continues to rise. It may dip and fall, but over time, it continues to rise. Now, if your ship comes into dock and they have confidence that the oil in the tank is pure oil, there's no impurities in there or anything, you're more likely to get a higher price for the oil than you are if it's got impurities in it. Does that make sense? So a lot of what you're actually doing is building confidence. Whenever you sell any product, you're actually selling it on the confidence. People are buying on the confidence that it is what it says it is. But people equally will pay a premium if they're comfortable that not only will it sustain itself, but also there is room for further growth as well. So there are two folds to any business. There's the day-to-day operation of the business and how that is affecting the business owner in his day-to-day life. But also at some point there is a destination port. He's going to come off the ship, he's going to go on the land. And that final severance package he gets very often will be based on the condition of the ship, the condition of the cargo, and how well trained the crew are at the other end. The next captain does not want to have to go on and retrain the crew, and he certainly doesn't want to find that there's impurities in the oil, because otherwise he's going to take some of his cash back. So at the end of the day, the whole thing you are eventually looking at some point, there will be an exit strategy, some way, shape or form, even if it's a management buyout. It also means, from an acquisition point of view, if you're selling into somebody who's looking to make an acquisition, it's a smoother journey, there's more desirability, but equally you might be looking to acquire. If your own systems and structures are like a bowl of spaghetti, and then you try and add another business into there, whether it's a straight line business or another bowl of spaghetti, you get a bigger mess and more of it falling over the side. So there's benefits to you doing this work for your own company sanity, but equally, if you want to grow and expand yourself, back to that foundation. If I've got a poor foundation, I can put a shed on it and it'll stand it. But if I then start building a skyscraper on poor foundations, it'll collapse. Whereas if I've got good, strong foundations, I can put a garden shed on it, I can put a Trump Tower on it, probably a bad thing to say, I can put an aircraft carrier on it, it doesn't matter, the foundation will hold what I want it to hold. Does that make sense? And so equally, efficiency means very often you need less staff members as well. Not in the wrong way, you can actually take those other people and put those into a role which is sourcing more business, as we discussed before. So, you know, there's nothing better than having a crew that when a problem happens, you've got enough spare crew to be able to go and deal with the problem. You know, if we've hit an iceberg and there's a leak, if everybody's too busy in the kitchen, who's plugging the leak? And if you plug the leak and take everyone out of the kitchen, nobody eats. So you've got to have that flexibility.
That's brilliant. So you've outlined some real tangible benefits to this process. So the first is, from a business owner's perspective, you can reduce your stress and that of your team. The second is you get a competitive advantage. You can grow your own market share. The third is you can scale because you've got a process for acquisitions. The fourth is you're giving yourself an effective exit option if that's where you're going, at probably a higher price and definitely less stress. So definite wins all round. And we're going to come on to the audience questions. I'm going to try and deal with these in the order in which they came up. So there's a logical conclusion, but apologies if I dot around a little. On change management, where we had a few, one of the questions was, what happens if I have the wrong person, or the person who's dealing with the change management turns out not to be the right one? How do I change it, and how do I do it without losing them or their buy-in?
Interesting point. So I'm a great believer in misdirection, and if you've got a dog that is temperamental and causing issues with the rest of the pack, sometimes what you have to do is throw them a bone and let them run after that bone, because while they're running in the long distance after that bone, you can then put the rest of the pack together and change the hierarchical order of that. When the other dog comes back, actually you pat it, you stroke it, you fuss it, you make it feel very, very wanted, and you give him another bone. Because actually that dog is still contributing, but sometimes not in the area that you need them. And sometimes people are in a position, not because they're the right person to be in a position, sometimes because they've been with the company such a long time, you think that they're the next in line and should have that role because of the loyalty that they've shown to the company. And that is always a very divisive thing. I'm a great believer in loyalty, and I think if the right people, you know, people are loyal, you should look after them. But equally, you have a duty to look after them as well. And so if you put them in the wrong position, or they're not actually generating what you need, you either have to support them and find a path for them to do, like buffing the ice flow, or you have to build structures around them where you can gradually bring in other people to deliver parts of that, break it down into even smaller steps. You know, the smaller the steps, the easier it is to distribute it out. The minute you keep big steps, it's hard to distribute a big step out.
Amazing. And another analogy, so that's good. Let's see if we can get another one into the next question. So the next question is, how do we make it's on implementation actually, which is, you talked about tracking and monitoring. So how do you do it, and how do you make it visible to the team? So the question was, should I have a whiteboard showing adherence to a process? How do people physically do this, and do they make it public within their team about who's following the new process and building the new habits?
Again, I think a lot of that comes down to company cultures, and I've worked with companies.
You may be muted.
Hello?
Or I've lost audio.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Well, I'm afraid I can't hear you, but also we've run out of time, I'm afraid. So that was a very good question. Huge apologies if you asked that. I will see whether we can put something in a follow-up email that will come out to you that addresses it. That's slightly embarrassing, and hopefully you can hear me. If you've got any feedback or questions, please do contact us at research@fixo.com. I still can't hear Nathan, but I'm hugely grateful for him sharing his time. And Nathan, if you can hear us, would you like to wave to the audience goodbye? Maybe he can. Oh, there he is. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you all very much for joining us. Our next webinar in this series is going to be thought-provoking and challenging. So Peter Knight, who many of you will know from the Property Academy or EA Masters, is talking about leading your agency into a 4.0 world. He's going to talk about what the 4.0 world is, and it's a seismic change to the way in which businesses and agency businesses will interact and the expectations on them, and how you can position yourself for this seismic change. So please do register for that. It will be challenging and thought-provoking. And finally, a thank you. So thank you for bearing with us through any connectivity issues through the course of today's webinar. We'd love to hear your feedback at the end, so you'll be asked to provide feedback. And thank you again to Nathan for sharing his expertise. His contact details and the like will be included in the follow-up email you have. And I wish you all a wonderful Friday. Thank you very much.